Few artists straddle the worlds of songwriting, production, and sonic innovation quite like Steven Wilson. From his early days recording on a custom-built 4-track to remixing classic albums in Dolby Atmos, Wilson has forged a singular path through modern music. Equally revered as a solo artist, the creative force behind Porcupine Tree, and a master remixer of iconic catalogue work. I'm very, very happy to be sitting here at his home studio with Mr. Steven Wilson. How are you?
I'm good, mate. Thanks for coming.
Good to see you.
When I realised I wanted to become a musician, which I was about 11, 12 years old, I kind of had this thing in my head, I want to be a musician. I was in love with this idea of making records. I didn't know what was involved. I just knew that this was something I wanted to do. I wanted to make these little pieces of plastic magic that people put on the turntable, and it transported them. And my family weren't particularly wealthy. 13, 14 years old, I'm just about managed to save up enough money to buy myself a cheap guitar from Woolworths, K guitar from Woolworths, if you remember them.
Very well.
And I was becoming interested in other things, like how did they get that sound on Mr. Blue Sky? Mr. Blue Sky. And I read it was this thing called a vocoder. Okay, my parents aren't going to be able to buy me a vocoder. Come on, I'm like a 14-year-old kid. But here's the thing, my dad was an electronic engineer. He was a genius. And I'm going to show you now what he made for me when I was 14 years old. This is the vocoder my dad made for me.
I was looking at earlier going, what is that?
When I was 14 years old, okay, and I've got to go over there again, sorry. We're talking about 1983, 1984. Porter Studios had come on the market, okay? The Tascam Porter Studio.
Yeah.
My parents couldn't afford to buy me one of those, okay? So what did my dad do? He bought a tape player off Maplin's and a 4-track tape head off Maplin's, and he made me this.
Wow.
He made me that. So I'm a 14-year-old kid that's experimenting with multi-track recording. It's got this ridiculous vari-speed thing on it that literally triples the speed. I mean, a normal Porter Studio had like one that you can 50 cents up, down. Yeah. This one was, so of course this is great. I'm trying to make psychedelic experimental music. Wow, great, woo-hey. A little built-in mixer. I mean, no EQ or anything like that. He built me a little mixing desk later on, which I would route out to the 4 channels. So I had EQ and stuff as well. But isn't that amazing? My dad, and he wasn't a musician. He didn't understand music. He built me a sequencer once, and he didn't know. He built me a 9-step sequencer because he could afford 9 of the relays.
Right.
And he thought, oh, more's better, right? He didn't know music was normally in 4/4. So I've got this 9-step sequencer. So everything I'm doing has to be in a tricky time signature.
That's awesome.
And that's the point, is that everything he made had this little quirk because he wasn't a musician. He wasn't thinking like a musician. He was an electronic engineer. But bless him, he made me all this stuff. So I'm like 14 years old. I've got a vocoder. Everything I was working with always have these little quirks that I would have to work around. That in a way, without wishing to be too romantic about it, I think, well, maybe that's why the music I've ended up making is relatively quite complex and sophisticated, because I had a 9-step sequence. I mean, come on. I've been fascinated with time signatures ever since. I love tricky time signatures, not for the sake of it, but I love to incorporate those things into the music. And yeah, so, I mean, this was the vocoder he made for me. It just had 2 modes. It had a sort of a basic sine tone and also a pure white noise or pink noise. And these were all the different bandwidths you could mess about with. They're amazing.
It's absolutely
amazing. And I still use them from time to time. Still use them. I mean, like anything that's kind of homemade, it's got something about it that is completely unique, that you will never get from anything else.
I enjoy the fact that we do a lot of talking off camera.
Yeah, we've made all the best stuff. All the best stuff is not filmed. Didn't capture it.
For some reason, that's what happens. But I want to go back over some of it. One of the things I was just telling you, that somebody who works with us has got a child in their life, a new baby. And I relayed to them that one of my friends who had 5 kids before I even had my first said the best advice he ever heard was ignore everybody's advice. Yeah. And that's kind of a metaphor, because I feel like when somebody has a way of doing something, to me, it shows a lack of creativity. It shows that this is my one method of recording and you're doing it wrong.
Right.
And I know that resonated with you.
It does really. You know, I mean, I kind of slightly tongue-in-cheek when you first arrived there, I slightly tongue-in-cheek said to you, I approached this like an idiot. And I kind of mean that in a way, because I don't really know what I'm doing. I think anyone that tells you there is a right or wrong way to do something, I would immediately be distrustful of that person. Some of the greatest records ever made are made in a very counterintuitive way. They're not necessarily high fidelity recordings. We talked about how often if you isolate like a drum kit recording on a classic record, in isolation, it's a pretty flat drum sound, but it's the right one for the track. It's got the magic. And I think a lot of the time there is a kind of, also this thing about the greatest music in history has very rarely been made by the best musicians. It's made by the people that are inspired. So when I say the best musicians, I mean, technically they're not particularly, they can't shred. They couldn't tell you the names of the chords they use. They can't tell you the scale they're playing.
Yeah.
Bob Dylan, you're going to tell me that he can tell you the names of the scales and the chords. Don't believe it. And I think a lot of the time, the best music is made by idiot savants. And I think Brian Eno, I might be paraphrasing here slightly, but I think Brian Eno said something along these lines, that making great art is not about knowing what you're doing. It's about knowing when you've hit on something good. You kind of shuffle along, trying stuff out. It's crap. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. You don't really know where you're going with it. You're kind of stumbling through, turning things off, trying things, adding overdubs. Try this, try that. None of it works. Oh, that's good. And the trick is to know, after all this time when you've been trying out stuff that doesn't work, to know when you've hit on something special. And that is about just hearing it. It's about understanding when something has got the magic to it. And that is not something to do with training. That is something to do with the creative spirit. And I'm not trying to big myself up here, because I'm, as I say, when it comes to the technical side of mixing, I've no idea what I'm doing. But I think I know when something sounds good. I've spent my whole life as a student of music. I've listened to, I still collect records. I still am very passionate about listening to and discovering music from all genres, recorded at all levels, from lo-fi industrial music to cinematic, high production records. And I love them all. I love the aesthetics of lo-fi, and I think you can learn something from anything. Listen to those old dub records, fantastic lo-fi made in a sort of basement in Jamaica using broken equipment. And I think there's something about the personality of music that has nothing to do with its technical brilliance or otherwise. Approaching mixing in that way, I think sometimes endears me to the artist. I'm not some technical boffin who's been trained how to mix. In fact, I don't really know what I'm doing. But I understand what makes that music special. I understand why that record's brilliant, because I love it and I want to preserve that. Whatever it is, I want to preserve that in my new mix or my Atmos mix or whatever. So I'll stumble my way through and I'll find out, if I do this and I do that and I do this, that sounds like what they did. And it's a lot of trial and error. And you know what? I love it. I love the process of deconstructing and reconstructing records I already know to figure out how they did them, because then that becomes part of my repertoire, part of my toolbox. So yeah, I'm inherently distrustful of the whole right way, wrong way. You've got to use this bit of gear, man. Why are you doing that? That's not good. You've got to do it through a proper amp, through a proper outboard, through a proper SSL, through amazing into a studio. That's not the way I learned to make records. I learned to make records in a little bedroom project studio, and I learned to get the best from that. So if you put me in a big studio now, I wouldn't have a clue. I wouldn't have a clue how to make a record in that situation. But in this situation, a little project studio with my plugins and my little upright piano, I can make a record, I think, that sounds as good as anything. Or the kind of record that I want to listen to anyway. And I think that's a lesson I learned very, very early on, dealing with record companies, dealing with A&R guys, dealing with big shot engineers and big shot producers. If there was a short time in my life where I did trust their opinion, I was never happy with the results when I did. Never happy with the results. And I learned that very early on. And that's probably why I'm stuck where I am, as a sort of little under the radar cult artist. But I'll take that. I'll take that. I'm very happy with what I do.
A little under the radar cult art.
Well, I'm okay. Maybe I protest too much there, but you know what I mean. I'm not a mainstream artist. No. I'll never be a mainstream mixing engineer. I'm not the kind of guy that you know, Taylor Swift's going to call up to mix her record. I'm not, although that's not a bad example because Taylor Swift works with a lot of alternative. The point is this: I'm never going to be the big shot producer mixing guy because I don't understand the kind of mainstream aesthetic. It's not a question of not understanding it. I'm not interested in it. Yeah, I'm not interested in it. I'm interested in things that sound quirky and a little bit, you know, peculiar, a little bit off the beaten track. Sometimes maybe sound even a bit cheap and inexpensive. I like that. You know, that's character for me. And I hear that in a lot of the records that I love, classic records I love. Not all of them. You know, I'm not going to say that about Trevor Horn production, but when I'm listening to Who's Next, the famous, brilliant, it's a brilliantly produced record. The drum sound's not that great, really. The piano's distorted, the bass is overloaded, but it's a great record and it all glues together beautifully, beautifully. The backing vocals are a bit out of tune. You know, you listen to any Beatles master tape, you're going to end up saying the same thing, I'm sure. I've never had the privilege, but I'm sure you're going to find stuff that's over-recorded, a little bit out of tune, squeaky bass drum pedals. That's the grain. That's what makes that music special to me. Led Zeppelin playing Black Dog and they're, you know, that whole thing, it's so close to falling apart.
Yeah.
It's so close to.
As a kid, I would listen to it and I'd be like, what's going on?
And it's so close to falling apart, but it's magical. And you could never reproduce that in a million years. Even Led Zeppelin couldn't reproduce that now.
Yeah.
It's a magical thing. So I think I learned early on the flaws in music sometimes, the imperfections, the kind of quirks, the things that we used to, in the 70s and 80s, we used to love and embrace those things. Now, I mean, imagine releasing a song like Bohemian Rhapsody now. Wouldn't even get out of the starting blocks. It would have 500 views on YouTube. And I think that's the thing, and without wishing to sound like a grumpy old man, that's the thing there's a lot I love about making music in the 21st century. Like I said, the amount of things you can do with sound to mutate, twist, process. There's never been more stuff like that. But music becomes more generic. We're going to Rick Beato territory here. Music does become more generic because I think attention spans get shorter and a lot of the quirks from music have disappeared because people are less prepared to embrace something that isn't uniform somehow. Of course, there are always exceptions. There are some great artists. Billie Eilish, I think, is incredible. My kids love Billie Eilish. Every time I hear a Billie Eilish record, I think, wow, she's doing everything wrong. But it's amazing. And she's selling lots of records. But you and I both know that 99% of modern pop sounds like it could have been created by artificial intelligence. And that's a shame to me because there was a time when all pop music sounded like it had a grain, an essence, a magic, a uniqueness to it.
One of my theories is first of all, I think we did it to ourselves.
For sure we did.
Yeah, we totally did it ourselves. And one of the things that I think, I would work with a lot of like indie bands, alternative bands that I was really excited with. And I would be like, can we just get the song up a little bit closer? You know, everything about it I love, but the song's not quite there. And they'd be like, oh, we don't want to sell out. We don't want to be this, that, and the other. And I feel like there's been this kind of divergence. We were talking about during lunch. What was great about so many of these bands that we both mutually love, it's like XTC, they could write some of the best pop songs. Senses Working Overtime, it's a massive pop song. Somebody could cover it now in a pop world and it would still be a hit. They would do it in a modern way, but it's a great song. And I think we sort of did it to ourselves. There became suddenly this kind of divergence where everything became very indie, you know, indie schmindy, my old manager, Sandy Robertson, used to call it. And then everything becomes pure pop. And yet every now and then, somebody from this world, our world, steps into writing a great, great song. And it can be a top 10 hit. It is still possible for bands. They just seem to not want to do it.
Interesting. I think maybe that's because they're listening too much to what's successful and then thinking that they have to do. I mean, this is one of the great malaises of the pop industry, and it never really worked. Obviously, it never really worked for me anyway. You listen to what is popular, and you think you have to somehow align yourself with that sound to be successful. Now, the problem with that is the music industry is always 2 years ahead. So by the time you've done what's popular, it's already out of date. So and at least that's always the way it worked with me. And very early on in my career, I did sort of try to contrive, is probably too strong a word, but I'll use it anyway. Contrive to make things that would sound a bit more contemporary, a bit more like what was being successful at that time. And by the time you've done it and delivered it to the record company, the whole scene's moved on anyway, and what you've done sounds incredibly dated. So I realized just do your own thing. And in my career, it's been very strange. I mean, obviously progressive rock is what I'm most associated with. Progressive rock is probably more acceptable now than it has been at any time in the last 40 years. It's still pretty much like the step kid that sort of stays in the cupboard in a way. In terms of England, there's still a sense that it's a little bit of something to be brushed under the carpet, but less so than at any other time since I've been a professional musician. And I hear progressive rock kind of popping up in different contexts now. It's interesting.
But I'd like a band like, say, Dream Theater, get back to, decide to do an album. Right, I've seen All Good People.
Well, that's
you know what I mean.
That's it. But that
you see my point. It's
yes, I do. Dream Theater is more on the progressive metal side. Yeah, but you're right. Even metal bands had great songs back in the day.
Motorhead had top 10 singles when I was a kid.
Yeah, that is true. I think one of the other problems these days is it possible to, given the climate now and the kind of attention spans we're talking about, is it possible, like Sensitive Work and Overtime is a great example actually. That song for the first minute is so dour, so downbeat, and actually quite dissonant.
Yeah. Hey, hey. Yeah, it's so dissonant.
Would people actually sit through that now? Because now when you listen to modern pop, firstly, every pop song has to be 2 minutes long maximum. And the chorus, the vocals got to be in almost instantly. Like I talk about this a lot with my music buddies from the same era as me. The art of the great intro.
Well, that was for the radio guy. Because here we got the new one from, and the intro was playing.
Not only because a great intro is a great intro. Sure. Me Feel Through. Come on, it's one of the most iconic intro of all time.
I agree, but I remember doing songs when I first moved to the US and writing our pop songs, and the label going, "This is great, but you need to put an intro on it because they've got to be able to introduce you over the stuff."
Interesting. So that's interesting.
So it sort of becomes a.
So in the streaming era, of course, now the opposite is true.
Very much so. Yeah.
The streaming era is now the vocal hook's got to be in right from the beginning. Intro, forget it.
Yeah.
Solo, forget. Guitar solo, sax solo, forget it. Middle eight, forget it. Starting with a verse, forget it. Straight in with the chorus hook.
Yeah.
Or don't even have a verse chorus, just have a hook that goes all the way through it. Yeah. And I get that. There's something wonderful about that. Sure. But when everything becomes like that, it's boring. I made a joke on stage. I was playing the Albert Hall a few years ago, and I made a joke on stage about how I was listening to a pop song on the way here. And I was listening
Congrats on the Royal Albert Hall, by the way.
Thank you very much. And the verse and the chorus and the verse and the chorus and the middle eight had all gone by in the time it would take me to just get the intro just starting. Because I like to have a good intro that gradually eases you, sets a mood. It's like making a piece of film and you have that kind of moody opening sequence. It might be a slow tracking shot across the Lake District or in a murder mystery or whatever. Why, that's, for me, that's what music can be like too. Slow tracking shot across a landscape. But you don't have that in a lot of modern pop music these days. So the whole art of songwriting, I think, it's the tail wagging the dog, isn't it? People only have short attention spans. They're not. Senses Working Overtime, great example. The chorus doesn't. I mean, I've never measured it, but the chorus doesn't come for a good while in that song. And when it does, it's this incredible release of.
Yeah, because you got that pre-chorus and all the world is football shaped.
Right. Well, the pre-chorus. There's a lost art. There's a lost art. The pre-chorus.
Yeah.
Now I always point to Mamma Mia, ABBA, 3-minute pop song.
Yeah.
Do you know how many sections and hooks there are in that? Okay, so the first that dung 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 do 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 dum. That's one. Then you've got that's a hook. Then you've got dun dun da 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 dun da 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 da. Hook number 2. Then you've got da 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 dun da 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 3. And then you've got da 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 dun 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 da 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 4. And then finally. After 4 hooks and 4 sections, you get to
that breakdown.
Mamma Mia, where the band drop out.
Yeah, band drop out. Yeah. Yeah.
And then not only after that, you've also got dun 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 dun, a 6th hook. Mm-hmm. It's ridiculous. Mm-hmm. This is a 3-minute pop song.
Yeah. And I did a whole episode on Dancing Queen. I put them top 40 greatest songs of all time.
Oh, absolutely, definitely, no doubt. Yeah. But I think that's the bit, like the idea in the XTC song, there is a pre-chorus, which is a hook in its own right.
Yeah.
And, you know, I mean, I don't practice what I preach because I don't really write. Well, I do sometimes write. I think I'll write good melodies at least, but I like tracks that don't necessarily conform to the pop format. But I admire songs that do massively. And there's definitely, you know, Beach Boys, all the usual, the Bee Gees, Beach Boys, Beatles, ABBA. I mean, there's still
all the A's and B's.
Yeah, A's and B's. Yeah, very good. Yeah, Carpenters, I see. These they understood something about the art of constructing a. Well, X doesn't fall into your category. XTC. Yeah. They understand something about the art of creating a.
It like sounds salt potato.
Yeah, it's got a C in it at least. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. I mean, I've said this over the years many times. I mean, I think I want to challenge bands to write great songs.
Okay, so let me be devil's advocate to you.
Please be devil's advocate.
Okay, I'm a new band, and you say to me, "Why don't you go away and write a song?" I'm going to say to you, they've all been written. They've all been written.
But I think at what point could you not say that?
Well, it's a good question. I feel that in a sense, all the great songs and all the great melodies, I mean, you know, without wishing to state the obvious, there's only so many notes, okay, unless you start working in microtones, but there's only so many notes, there's only so many chords. Most of the great songs ultimately have been written. And I think it's one of the reasons why most melodies can remind you of something else.
Sure.
It's why we see an increasing amount of lawsuits.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's very hard to come up with something truly unique, melody-wise, harmonically. I think what we can do now is we can create sound worlds that people have never heard before by virtue of the fact that we have all these new ways of processing and twisting sound. And I think that, in a way, is why so much music has become more production-led. So I'm playing devil's advocate slightly to you there.
No, I think it's a good point.
Why would I write a song? Because they've all been written.
Well, I agree. XTC were a great example. I was used being a massive Queen fan. Queen, I think of the game. You know, we're talking about the blends. Pink Floyd did it. I mean, another Brick in the Wall Part 2 is a disco beat.
Yes, absolutely.
It's a disco beat. Another One Bites the Dust, a disco beat. One of the beauty of all the music we admire was the blending genres.
Sure. Hybrids, yeah.
And what I tend to find if I'm listening to modern rock music, it's like interchangeable with other rock bands.
Yeah.
Not only the obvious things like, oh, wow, they're all using the same kick and snare sample, which is insane.
Yeah.
How much repetition there is in that.
Yeah.
But just the formulaic kind of approach.
No, you're right. And I'll give you an anecdote now. I was watching a movie with my kids the other day, and the soundtrack was this female, very modern pop sounding female diva, very much in the Ariana Grande, Dua Lipa style. All the songs were by this female singer-songwriter, very pop, very modern pop, sort of K-pop influence as well. And it was okay. I didn't dislike it, but it's like vapor to me. It just doesn't mean anything to me. But being the person I am, being the musician I am, I was curious to know who this artist was that created all these songs that were through the movie. And you may guess the punchline. They were all different artists.
Oh, okay, yeah.
They were all different artists. Yeah. I was gobsmacked. Mm-hmm. My God.
So tuned and timed, the personality was removed.
But not only that, the quality of the voice. Every voice had that kind of post-American Idol, what I call the fake emoting.
I use that example.
Emoting.
I use that example with drummers. So drummers now are listening to incredibly timed drum sampled drums, meaning consistent hits all the time and consistent, 16th, 32 note edited stuff. So you get young drummers and they're like, do da, do da, do da, do da, do da, do da, do da. There's no that da boom, but there's not that
swing.
There's not the swing. There's not the.
Well, that's interesting because there's definitely a generation of singers that have learned to sing by listening to people through auto-tune.
Yeah,
and they can almost do that with their voice.
Yeah,
it's incredible. I mean, it's impressive. Yeah. But there's something about it that's also very bland and very banal.
Yeah, I think it comes back to your point you were making about the one way of working. Anybody that has the right way of doing it, it's like, cool, that can be a tool in your arsenal. If you want to do a section of a song where everything is like this, that could be really great to set off something where some rasps comes back in or something like this. I think it's all of one big kind of global point where I think music is at its best when it is drawing from so many different experiences, experimentation, and that is true creativity.
But that brings me back to my original point: is that would a track like that, would a band like that even get out of the starting blocks? Because I think it's never been harder to convince a listener to engage with something that's unfamiliar to their ears.
Yeah.
The reason for that is because of the ease of access to music and the proliferation of music. There is, whatever it is, the 180,000 songs added to Spotify every day, whatever the figure is, something crazy. Why would you engage with something that doesn't quite connect with you when there's a million other songs you can?
Well, I think we just have to challenge, because I always use 1980. Now I am going to grab the phone, because it's not a sexy year. It's not
the zenith of.
Yeah, it's not 76 punk. It's not 67 Summers of Love.
Right.
So I'm just going to write hits of 1980.
1980, Games Without Frontiers, Peter Gabriel.
We're going to go hits. There's the hits, which it was a hit. Don't get me wrong.
That was it.
It's a great example.
Wouldn't be now, which is my point. It would not be now.
Right, but the proliferation of genre-less stuff.
Okay.
So this is just what came up when I typed in that on Google. Call Me, Blondie.
Yeah.
Crazy Little Thing Called Love.
Yeah.
Another Brick in the Wall Part 2.
Yeah.
Upside Down.
Oh yeah.
Got
Ross. Nice produced.
Escape, the Pina Colada song.
Oh yeah, great song. Yeah.
Do That to Me One More Time.
Yeah.
Still Rock and Roll to Me.
Yeah.
Ride Like the Wind. I'll be working my way back to you.
Oh yeah, Spinners, Detroit Spinners.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hit Me With Your Best Shot. Anyway, these are all like big. This is an American phone, so this would probably be American.
I would have said Hit Me With Your Rhythm Stick.
Hit Me With Rhythm.
Although maybe that was 79 anyway, baby.
That was 79, I believe, and I've done a video on that, and it did really well. Thank you, audience. Good taste. My point is like, one thing that sets them all apart is the fact that they don't follow. Now, and to answer your point, the artists that come out of nowhere, Billie Eilish you used it as an example. When she came out, nothing sounded like that.
And she is the exception. There's always an exception that proves the rule.
But those exceptions are what happens in sort of spatial time. And everybody is doing, as we're saying, repetitive. Look, I've been in label meetings where they play a song, and this is a word I hear all the time. Yeah, it's pretty good. It's competitive. What they mean is, it's going to sit nicely and it's going to compete in that genre.
See, I find that revolting.
Yeah, it is revolting. Thinking of artists of the last 20 years that jump out of that, and they may not be in our genre, but they make a point. Gaultier, when that song came out, nothing sounded.
Yeah, no, that is true. That is true.
Lord, Royals, when that came out, nothing sounded like it. Yeah. Massive worldwide smashes. Yeah. Billie Eilish comes out, massive worldwide smash.
Yeah. It's not all lost.
It's not all lost.
No.
It's just, I think, maybe this is going to be contentious, but I feel like it's easier to go, we have the technology to figure out how this kind of genre is done. I want to be this, so I'm going to copy that, and then I'm as good as everybody else. So it's easier for artists and producers.
Yeah, I think so the internet has made the world obviously a very small place. So any sort of innovation in music, everyone knows about it within 24 hours.
Sure.
And I think maybe, I always use the analogy of the symphonic form was something that developed literally over centuries.
Yeah.
Symphony, or the classical music tradition developed over centuries because news traveled slowly.
Sure.
Now, an innovative record comes out, a Billie Eilish record or, any of the records you mentioned, a Kanye production or whatever it was, and suddenly the day after, everyone's copying it. Everyone's imitating a copy. So it becomes a meme, if that's the right word, it becomes a meme.
And digital means they can copy it so much better than they could have in the past.
Yeah, I mean, quite literally copy it in some cases. They can strip out the drum break, stem separate the snare sound, whatever it is they want to do, they can literally emulate it. I think I remember, so growing up in the 80s, you must be like me, every time Prince came out with a new album and a new single, I knew he was going to completely reinvent himself. Hearing Sign of the Times as the first single off that record, hearing Kiss as the first single off Parade. I mean,
when I heard Boys and Girls,
so
stripped down.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh. And just, oh my God, he's done it again. He's reinvented. I mean, without wish to go into the realms of hyperbole, he's reinvented pop again. This is so far beyond. I love Quincy and Michael Jackson's records, but Prince was on another level, because he was appealing to a similar audience, but also pushing the sonic envelope every album reinventing himself. Now, maybe you're right. The Billie Eilish they're kind of the equivalents of this, or, of this, or Tyler the Creator, or whoever. They're not. I suppose the point for me is they're not artists that are kind of in my world.
No, absolutely, I agree.
And I suppose in a way, so that's why I do sound like rock, because I come from the tradition of rock music, and rock music has allowed itself in a way to be marginalized.
Right.
And in a way, you mentioned, you used the phrase, we did it to ourselves earlier on. Rock music kind of did it to itself. It became formulaic. And just in the same way that rock music kind of usurped jazz. I mean, jazz was the dominant musical form of the first half of the 20th century. Rock came along and rendered it old-fashioned, obsolete overnight. And R&B, hip-hop, electronic music, dance music did the same thing to rock. Pretty much the last great era for rock music, the 90s. Pretty much since then, rock music has become... Now, I say that with the caveat that there's a band that's just come out recently called Sleep Token, a British band who have had a #1 Billboard album and a #1 British album and are massive, and they're amazing. But to me, there's something about their music that sounds closer to K-pop than it does to Black Sabbath. And that's a really interesting development.
You've got some choice apparatus in here.
If you say so, yeah.
I do. We were talking earlier off camera that you like to use drummers that have their own rooms.
Yeah.
Which is pretty much
everyone these days, yeah.
So there's no need for you to have a drum room here, but everything else presumably you're doing here, from keys to guitars to vocals and you name it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even have an isolation booth. So literally when I'm miking up a guitar cab, for example, there's a bit of trial and error involved, I have to record it, listen back to it. Oh no, I need to do this and I need to do that. But you know what? It's not the end of the world. It's not the end of the world to have to do that. Yeah, and I just like being in this, it's comparatively quite a small space. It's cozy. It feels good in here and it sounds good. I mean, the funny thing is every studio I'd had before now was literally whatever room in the house I set my computer up in. That became my studio, and very few of them, or in fact, none of them had been properly treated acoustically. So this is the first time ever I actually had a room that I knew was going to be the studio, and I brought people in to actually give it proper acoustic treatment. So it sounds beautiful in here. It sounds great.
Got Genelec immersive system here?
Yes, 7.1.4.
7.1.4.
That's what you're trying to figure out.
That's what I was trying to figure out.
Let me help you there. 7.1.4. So 2 at the front, 2 at the sides, 2 at the back, center, sub, and then 4 above you, 2 in front and 2 behind. Yeah.
I mean, you're a busy boy. Whenever I looked you up with Immersive, I mean, you are going through how many bands' different back catalogues at the moment?
Probably quite a lot by now. I mean, I've kind of become someone that is known for doing classic recreations of. So essentially what I mean by that is you're kind of rebuilding, you're having to rebuild the original mix before you do anything in spatial or Atmos or 5.1. I still do 5.1 mixes too. Before you do any of that, you have to recreate the stereo because these are albums that people know and love generally. And I think I've become quite good at that just by, listening and figuring out, oh, that's how they did this. So I've become known as someone that recreates these kind of vintage classic rock albums and then breaks them out into spatial audio, which is a treat, because a lot of these albums I grew up with.
I was about to say, you come from a place of being a huge fan of these artists and these records.
And I only really do records that I know and like. Sometimes I get offered things and I'm like, well, I don't really think I'm the right person to do that. I don't know the record. I'm not necessarily a fan of the record. And I always have this belief that the listener can hear if the person that mixed the record actually likes the record. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. You can kind of hear when they're kind of disconnected from it somehow. At least I romantically believe that to be the case. So I try to only do records that I genuinely like and genuinely love, or at least can learn to love and genuinely like and have an admiration for.
I've often wondered if somebody handed you a record to do in Immersive, which was a little bit more modern, not necessarily in the last 10 or 20 years, but maybe in the 90s where it was really heavily slammed with every hit being a sample, how really you can do that in Immersive, because in stereo, you can have this kick and snare kind of like hitting 0 dB every single beat. Put that back into Immersive, it must be incredibly soulless and boring.
Well, so I mean, I have done some records from the 90s, not many, and they tend to be more guitar based. I did Suede, for example, right. But that whole question of when you have something that's all being squashed down a stereo channel, and how that kind of symbiotic thing where samples and source material kind of gel together and all feel like they're glued together. There is always that question when you start pulling the glue apart, does it kind of destroy the mix? Also, just the fact that you've got a little more air and space, and does it sound as punchy? Now, one of the criticisms that has been leveled at some things I've done, and legitimately so, although I think it's kind of inherent, is that take a band like The Who, an album like Who's Next, which I did remix. Part of the power of that record is it's all kind of being squashed into the same stereo sort of mix. And when you start pulling it apart, does that kind of gestalt entity start to break apart? In other words, it no longer has the kind of glue and the magic that it had in stereo. And I'm very conscious of that. And so one of the things I've tried to do with albums like that is to not pull apart the glue. And that's just been trial and error. So for example, you don't take away, you kind of keep the rhythm section, we're getting into detail here now, but I've tended to end up keeping the rhythm section together.
Right.
So I don't pull the drums, the bass and the rhythm guitar, because there is something about that, something coming all down this one channel is kind of what gives it the magic.
And they predominantly in that situation would have been tracked live together.
Well, exactly that too. Yeah.
So that interplay is there from the get-go.
So I mean that is a problem, and I think that's why I've always said, and I still believe this, that the kind of music that lends itself best to spatial audio are things like progressive rock, electronic music, where it already has a kind of aspect of using the studio, sound design. Things that you wouldn't get on an AC/DC record, for example, little moments of sound design.
Makes perfect sense.
Yeah, and those things are a gift to spatial audio. But then you get the problem of how do you mix AC/DC? How do you mix Motorhead? How do you mix Aerosmith in spatial audio? Because there is that sense of it being a rock and roll band playing together on a stage in front of you. And you don't really want to start pulling that apart. So, I've had those kind of dilemmas with albums like the Who album. I did a Kiss album, similar kind of, although Bob Ezrin was the producer on that, and Bob Ezrin was very good on, very strong on sound design and sound effects and all those little overdubs. So that did actually conversely work quite well in spatial, yeah.
Did you get that through Ezrin?
No, that came through the label Universal.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Because obviously Ezrin, The Wall, so many crossover points. So
we're waiting to hear a spatial audio mix of that. Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about this. So you got 741. You're using Apollos.
Yes.
What DAW do you use when you're?
So I'm using Logic.
Logic has it already built in.
Well, Logic. Well, I don't actually use the Logic Atmos implementation.
Oh, you don't.
And there's a very good reason for that. And I'm always talking to the guys at Logic about this development. Please, can you put this functionality in? I love to use the sequencer in the Dolby Atmos panner. So I'm basically using the Dolby Atmos plugin as a plugin within Logic, which bridges out to the Dolby Atmos bridge through to the Dolby Atmos renderer. So there's a horn part. So I've made that into a Dolby object using the Dolby Atmos panner.
Yeah.
Now, so the Dolby Atmos panner has this thing, the sequencer on it, which I use all the time. So for example, I might decide, I want it to move around like this, like that, and there it goes. And because I use this so much, I'm so reluctant to give it up and go to the Logic Atmos panner, which doesn't have a sequencer in it at the moment. I'm always speaking to Manfred at Apple about this. Please, can you implement it? And he said, we might do it one day. Anyway, so at the moment I'm sticking to my preferred workflow, which is to use the Dolby Atmos panner as a plugin within Logic, which then routes through the bridge into the renderer. Yeah.
I understand. Yeah. I mean, that's so much quicker and easier. So,
yeah, it's amazing. I mean, just to get bass. I mean, for example, something like like an effects return, like a delay or something. You just want to feel like it's got some movement going on it. So you just do that, and there you go. And suddenly your effects return, your delay return is just, it's just moving, and it's not something you'd necessarily be aware of when you're mixing it. But it's creating some sense of movement. So funny, I get a lot of people artists come here and listen to their Atmos mixes. And of course, the thing about an Atmos mix is you can watch it. You can actually see the mix on the renderer. So they're sitting there and they're watching and they're listening to their track and they're seeing this object go, and they're saying, I can't hear anything moving around. What is that? And I can see it. So they're watching the mix and they're getting this kind of cognitive disconnect between what they're seeing and what they're hearing. And I'm saying that's because it's probably just like an effects return or something. You're not necessarily aware of it, except subconsciously you are. There is this sense of movement.
And if you mute it and you're like, oh, something changed.
Something doesn't feel quite as dynamic somehow.
Yeah.
So to cut a long story short, I love the sequencer. I use it all the time, and that's why this is currently my workflow.
You're right. It seems, like you said earlier, it seems incredibly intuitive.
Yeah.
What a great song to work off. What a great album to work off.
Brilliant record. Beautifully recorded.
Padgham.
Hugh Padgham, lovely guy as well. I had a lot of sort of discussions with Hugh. You know, one of the things that's, when you're recreating a mix like this, it's great to have a dialogue with someone that remembers, like, what, you know, so the first thing I'll do is I bring up Hugh and I say, Hugh, what reverbs? Because reverbs are such an important signature part of the sound of a record. So 70s, it was usually EMT 140. 80s, it becomes 224, you know, Lexicon 224, AMS, all those things. So the first thing you do is you bring out the producer or the engineer and you say, what were you using? And they say, oh, we were using this, we were using that. Or were you using Roland Dimension D, using Eventide harmonizers, and all that stuff is so important. But 9 times out of 10, they can't remember anyway. So this is what I'm saying. One thing I think I've got quite good at is listening to a mix, original mix, and
figuring it out.
And saying, that, and I can hear the signature, that's a harmonizer on 99. Or that's a harmonizer on 98, or that's a Dimension D, or that's the AMS nonlinear snare preset. But the thing is, the more records you do, the more you kind of begin to recognize these things, and it just speeds up the process. So you're no longer having to hunt through 5 different plugins and 27 different presets. You can instantly say, that's that setting. And I think because I've done so much over the years now, I kind of recognize the signature of these things. But it's great to have a dialogue with the original engineer or producer to be able to help you out along the way. Yeah.
And it must be just fun getting to talk to Hugh about
great
how these records were made.
Well, Hugh's produced or been engineered so many of my favorite XTC, you know, those old XTC records.
Black Sea and English Settlement.
Yeah.
2 of the greatest albums ever made.
Which he was doing with Steve Lillywhite, or no, but English Settlement was just him, but Black Sea, Drums and Wires with Steve Lillywhite when he was still an engineer. Synchronicity, the Police, you know, and the Genesis records from this era, which we were talking about off camera, how this is our favorite era of Genesis.
So good.
Yeah, absolutely love it.
Yeah.
And he's just a lovely guy and very, you know, not pretentious about it at all. And I love that about Hugh. He's very unpretentious about it. He's like, well, we didn't know what we were doing. We're just trying stuff out, you know, and I've always sort of followed that philosophy myself. I don't really know what I'm doing, but I know when it sounds good.
That's the biggest skill.
And those are the producers I love the most. People like Steve Lipson, you know, were very, very kind of about demystifying the whole process of making records. So I don't know, we just tried some mics, we tried this, it sounded good, we went with it, you know.
I just remember being a kid, I was talking to about it, trying to get that funk guitar tone that he would get on so many of those great songs like Live to Rhythm. He goes, oh, it's just my Strat through a Whirlwind DI plugged straight into the SSL.
Yeah.
And I'm like...
But I mean, it probably took him 2 minutes to get that sound.
That was probably why he did it, because it was quick.
It was quick. But the point is that when records become big hits, the sounds become iconic.
Yeah.
And then generations after that spend hours and hours trying to recreate those sounds that were very much, you know, spur of the moment. They weren't spending like days and days searching for the sound. It's just the sound of a particular guitar through a particular pedal. And, you know, but that, you know, that's the history of music, isn't it? These kind of iconic sounds were created very quickly.
But then you also get the other thing, like on Slave to a Rhythm, where they go in and they get that go-go beat, but they spend weeks and only come away with that. But it basically becomes like, oh, we need to rework the song around this groove.
But Steve, and I'm sure you've spoken to him about this, but Steve tells the story about how they got that in about 2 hours in the studio, and then Trevor spent 6 months trying to do something better, and then they went back to the first thing they got into. I mean, but that's part of the process too.
Part of the process.
Do you know, one of the first things I ever realized about myself when I started making records is I had to have my own studio. You know, I started in the early 90s and there was still the culture there. You paid a lot of money, you'd go into Orinoco, you'd go into Iraq or whatever, and you'd spend weeks and weeks making your record and you'd pay a lot of money. And the problem with that is that when you've spent so much time and money doing that, if there's something you're not happy about, you've got no recourse to go back and scrap it. And I realized very early on about myself, I needed to be the kind of person that could spend a week programming a drum part and then decide, you know what, it was better. The first thing I did that I didn't think about a week ago, that loop, that's better than all this shit I've spent ages and ages doing. And it's hard to make that, it's almost a psychological thing. When you've spent so much money and time doing something like that, you feel almost beholden to go with this thing you've spent all, but actually the right decision is to say, but it sounds worse than that thing I just did in my home studio.
Yep.
And it's hard to make that psychological leap when you've just spent 10 grand. And I realized about that myself early on, that I needed to be the kind of person that could spend a week and just decide, I want to scrap it. And you can only really do that, or you can do that, but it's easy to do that when you've spent no money doing that. You spent time, okay. So but that's a really important lesson to learn from those kind of stories, the go-go beat. The first thing they did, the first day in the studio, ended up, even though they spent 6 months trying to better it, they ended up saying, you know what, magic was there. First thought, best thought.
Yeah.
Best thought, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely incredible. Well, I'm loving this. I mean, so talking of working in here, you've got some choice pieces. Obviously, you're on your own. So when you're tracking bass or guitars or whatever, what are you using? 2 inputs at a time? The stereo, I see you have a pair of 1073 mic pre's there.
Yeah, so I mean, I use that. I mean, again, we were talking about how it's like first thought, best thought, and the one thing you don't want to be going through when you've got an idea is don't want to be weighed down or slowed down by having to get a tone, having to get a sound, mucking about. I'm very laissez-faire when I track. I mean, I have one great mic, which is a clone of a 47 made by a company called The Mic Shop. I think they're out of Nashville. And I use that for pretty much everything. I've got piano mics, Sawyer's piano mics permanently on the piano. I've got a couple of mics hanging. I forget who makes these ones.
Austrian Audio.
Austrian Audio, thank you. Yeah.
818s.
I've got like I was recording a tom-tom yesterday and I literally just stuck it in the middle of the room, stuck those mics up and hit it. It sounded great, you know. So I don't get into that thing about move the mic 3 inches here, because the point is that slows down your creative process. So literally with the guitar, a lot of the time I'm just going through this little thing there. Hughes and Kettner Amp Man. Yep. Or I'll plug directly into the Apollo and I'll load up one of the Logic, guitar processors, amp simulators. And, when I get to the stage where I'm actually making the record for real, I might go back and retrack records through the amps. But again, a lot of the time, whatever sound you've got, it may not be the most luxurious, amazing sound, but you've kind of built the fabric of the track around it.
You know what I love about what you're saying here? And I think you were sort of intimating this when we were sitting on the couch before we started. It's like you're connecting all the dots, because here you are, you grew up on arguably the best period of music, that kind of 75, 85, all of those records where the technology and the songwriting and everything all came together. Any genre, whether it be new wave of British metal or ska or two-tone, all the songs were phenomenal and they were all chart songs. It was an amazing time for us as kids. But you're not being beholden to going, well, but they would have used a mic over here and that would have been spinning up, you can separate that. You can say, well, I can get the sound. I don't necessarily have to go back and recreate exactly how something was recorded. There's no dogma is what I'm saying. You're not being held back by a dogma.
No, and I think one of the wonderful things about making records in the current era is that there's never been more ways to process and twist sound than there is now. And in a sense, in the 70s and the 60s and 70s and the 80s, they were having to find new ways to, they were having to basically experiment a lot in big studios, miking up a Leslie, putting a vocal through, famously the Beatles, putting a vocal through a Leslie cabinet or whatever it is. But the point is now that we have so many incredible plugins. And as someone that recreates a lot of these vintage mixes, I have amazing emulations of all of these plugins, the 140.
And you've been able to compare them.
The 1176. Yes and no. Yes and no.
I have the privilege of having those multi-tracks.
I do have the privilege, but what I haven't done is I haven't sat with an original, I have got an 1176 to be fair there, but I haven't sat there with an original 224 and a 140 and got to listen to the plug-in version.
Right.
To me, listening to the records it sounds incredibly close. Now, I'm sure there will always be producers, maybe from the era, that will listen and say, it doesn't sound as good. There's a magic that isn't there. But to me...
Actually, I know a lot of those guys. I don't think they think that.
Maybe they don't.
It's more of the sort of like the fan of the fan, because you're messing with their memory of being 17 years old in 1975.
The bedroom, the armchair critics.
Yeah. But I think, Jack Douglas is a great old friend. Shelley, lots of these guys that we grew up listening to their records. And they all say, if this technology had been around when they were making records, they would have been using it.
Right.
To me, you hear that too.
Yeah, I do, actually, to be fair. To me, it sounds incredibly close to the sound that I'm hearing on the original records.
I believe you, because I've listened, and they do an amazing job.
I think the point is this: you're the same generation as me. We grew up at a point when recording was transitioning from analog tape. I mean, my first recording system was ADATs, which looking back now was a horrible technology. But actually at the time, I thought it was amazing. This
kind of was amazing.
Yeah. And it was amazing.
Yeah.
It was amazing. The reason I say it's horrible now is because none of my tapes play anymore. And every time I put them into the bloody machine, it chews them up, spews them out.
Yeah.
So it was it was like DATs, A very few, I still got a DAT player on top of the desk there because I have a whole 5-6 year window when I mixed everything to that. And it's a horrible technology because about half the tapes I play now, it's just digital. Yeah, it's horrible. But at the time, it was amazing. Mm-hmm. It's amazing because you didn't have to go into a £1,000 a day studio to get perfect digital quality or whatever. But anyway, so
demo studios were 500.
Exactly,
A crappy 16 8-track demo studio used to cost me £500 to go into a day.
Exactly, and suddenly you're liberated from all of that. Yeah. You've got ADATs, you've got damage. Anyway, it was wonderful at the time, but my point is that now we realise the technology was very flawed. But my point is this, that I grew up in this age. I did not grow up in the age of analog recording. I did not learn how to use these things. I don't know how to use the actual outboard stuff. I've got 111, but you can see I've got no vintage outboard here at all, really. The preamp and the 1176, that's my chain for recording vocal, basically.
I mean, you are the proof that the ears are the most important thing.
Well, I like to think that. I mean, I do. I love analog. I mean, you can see a lot of them are on tour at the moment, but I've got a Mellotron there.
Yeah.
I've got a 2600 in the corner. I love the unpredictability of analog instruments. Okay. But I don't think that extends, for me at least, that doesn't extend to the outboard stuff. The plugins for me are, I love this generation of recording.
So I'm assuming a lot of UAD?
Yeah, so I love the UAD plugins. Again, these vintage mixes, the UAD plugins are a godsend because they essentially have created emulations of almost everything. And so I don't know if I could do it without the UAD plugins. They're amazing.
The Chiltern Piano Company.
Yeah, so you know what? I ever since I grew up listening to old Beach Boys records, I've always preferred the sound of a lovely upright to a big grand. Mm-hmm. It's got so much character, particularly when it's just beginning to drift out of tune.
Yeah.
I love that. I mean, that's that sound that you hear on albums like Smiley Smile and Friends, those classic Beach Boys records. And this is a little bit out. This is going a little bit out of tune now, but it's just got this lovely, warm, kind of organic sound. And I have these Sawyer's mics permanently set up. And what I tend to do with the piano, every time I record it, are you familiar with the Aberrant DSP Sketch Cassette plugin?
Yes.
It's my favourite plugin.
Okay.
And I'll tell you what I love on it, the compressor.
Link down below.
The link, I love it. It's like a $20 plugin.
Yeah,
it's like a no-brainer. It's amazing. And do you know what I love on it? The compressor.
Oh, okay.
Compressor. It also creates brightness to the sound as well. And I've no idea what it does, but I tend to always put my little upright through the Aberrant DSP Sketch Cassette plugin. And that's my piano sound. That's my piano sound.
It sounds beautiful.
Yeah.
I've said this many times, and the audience will get bored of me saying this, but the great thing about an upright is it's your upright. It's your thing. Everybody now has, when we were kids, we're talking about the advent of digital and why ADAT seems so incredible. You could, the idea of having a Steinway perfectly in tune and a pair of 67s over it in a beautiful room was just like,
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that's easy to get now.
Yeah.
I can download any piano in any symphony hall. What I can't get is your piano.
Totally this. because uprights just have more personality, don't
Yeah.
they? And also the way they go out of tune
Yeah.
is also something, it's different every day. I mean, that's the point.
Mellotron, there's this.
Yeah. So the Mellotron is a new quote unquote Mellotron,
Okay.
but they're still made, or at least they were when I picked this up about 12, 13 years ago. They're still made by the company that always made them, Streetly Electronics.
Oh, okay.
Who made Mellotrons way back in the 60s. It's still the same technology. It's still mechanical. It still has tape frames inside it, but it's like an original Mellotron on steroids. Most of your viewers know how Mellotron works, but might not have actually seen inside one. So it's literally a bunch of tape loops. So each of these here is a strip of tape with a sound on. And essentially when you press a key, it's a tape head going down onto a piece of tape. And that's the beauty about Mellotron, is because a tape head going down onto a piece of tape is not an exact science. So every time it goes down, it kind of engages in a slightly different way. And if you don't press it firm enough, you get the equivalent of what's, you know, a tape head not engaging with with a piece of tape properly.
That's great.
So each frame has 3 sounds. So for example, we're on frame 3 at the moment, which is the Mark II piano. Trent Reznor uses that sound a lot, the Mellotron piano. The pump organ. And vibes, which I love the Mellotron vibes. And the other thing is, when I had this made, I asked them to make me a half-speed switch. So...
Lovely, also.
Yeah. The distortion is. So basically, you can make things sound very creepy with the half-speed switch. So for example, if I want to go now to load up a different sound, let's go and load up the flutes, which is in the next bank. I have to literally ask it to change the tape frame. So cycle to frame 2. So we'll sit here and wait while it loads up a different tape frame. So essentially what it's doing there is it's all on the same piece of tape, but it's moving to a different piece of the tape. So you can see that it's actually got a little white chalk mark 2 on there to say this is where the sounds in bank 2 start. So now we've got the flute, the classic Strawberry Fields flute sound, and then also we got Mark II violins, also a classic Tron sound, and cello. Now that one at half speed will sound really creepy.
That's a great bass.
Yeah, it's got some serious low end on there.
Yeah.
I'll have to use that later. That's
Yeah,
a good sound here. So that's I had them put the half speed switch in for that very reason, to get those kind of tones. There you go. It's the Mellotron. Yeah. So that was something and the funny thing is, I bought this because for years I've been using sample Mellotrons, thinking to myself, it's the same thing, isn't it? A Mellotron is a sampler. So using it.
Yeah.
And then I went down one day to Robert Fripp's place, and he had his original M400, and I played it, and a kind of light bulb moment. Oh yeah, there's no substitute for the real thing. And sometimes there isn't. So in that case, I really felt there was. So I went out and ordered one, and I had to go on a waiting list for about a year to get one.
Wow.
Gary Barlow was above me in the waiting list, if you can imagine that. And Julian Cove.
We'll take that.
There you go. Yeah, we can plug a guitar in and just...
Yeah, I'd be interested. I don't know. I mean, I know all of the trendy ones like the Neural DSP and people the Tone X.
Yeah.
And
I mean, this is a few years ago now. I mean, I use the Neural DSP on tour now. It's amazing.
right.
But this, I've just had this as a desktop thing. It's really easy just to dial in the tone very quickly. So I'd plug in a guitar, just quickly get a tone, you know, mess about with you've only got a few knobs to mess about with, and you're off. Helps the guitar's in tune normally, but anyway, you get the point. And then if you want like a heavy sort of, you know, and that, you know, that's 20 seconds. I've got a sound I can start tracking stuff with. And again, I'm always thinking, well, I'll do it again properly later. Inevitably, you get to the point where you can't imagine anything different.
Do you find that you might put an impulse response on the end of that?
Well, I tell you what I do is I sometimes, even if I end up keeping a demo sound like this, what I'll do is I'll play it out into the room and just pick up the ambience from the 2 Austrian audio mics, stereo, and dial that in.
Nice.
But I also use, do you know the Universal Audio Ocean Way plugin? That's brilliant for adding stuff like that. So for give an example there. So if I've created a demo sound, it sounds too DI, it sounds too demo-y, either route it out into the room and re-record it in through the Austrian audio mics, or use the Ocean Way Studios plugin, the Universal Audio plugin, which basically does the same thing, but with a bit more flexibility. So you're basically putting it in a room, you've got close mic, mid mic, and then far mics. It just puts a bit of air around the sound, so it stops it sounding too demo-y. Suddenly it feels like, okay, there was some air moving here.
Yeah.
So this is another godsend for me, this plugin. Suddenly you're in a room.
It's great.
It's brilliant, isn't it?
Yeah. You can change mics, you can do all kinds of stuff. Do you find you open it up and go, boom, love that?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Pretty much. All the stuff you can do, how often do you actually get around to exploring it? I find that generally with software. I mean, Logic is a great example. I've been using Logic pretty much ever since it, became the successor to Creator Notator. I started off Creator Notator. There's still 90% of it. I have no idea. There's so much in it now, but you just tend to gravitate to the stuff that the stuff that works for you, the stuff that, that you need. And I think with the Ocean Way plugin too, I usually just experiment with the 3 different rooms, the 3 different distances. Sometimes I might just roll off, do a low shelf, get rid of the low, some of the mung on the low end, but that's about it really. Otherwise it just instantly sounds like it's in a room. And that's what I need.
Yeah. I mean, what I think a lot of your solo stuff and the Porcupine Tree stuff, like the guitar layering, is a big part of it. Not surprised that you have a baritone. Are you Nashville?
Yeah.
Are you when you're coming up with parts, you're sort of thinking like a Brian Wilson way of like, this guitar part goes here, this one goes here, and you kind of stack them in that.
I think that's, for me, that's one of the joys about recording, is the way you can combine instruments. And as you say, that was the classic Brian thing, wasn't it? What would it sound like if we combine a harpsichord with a plucked bass?
Yeah.
And, everyone knows what a guitar sounds like. Everyone knows what a synth sounds like. Everyone knows what a bass sounds like. But you can create interesting mixtures of sounds. And I still get great joy from doing that, tracking, like you say, tracking stuff. I mean, one of the great things about recording acoustic guitars now, for me, is using the Nashville, having a layer of Nashville. So a couple of normal guitars and then adding, suddenly it just sings in a completely different way. It's got a kind of 12-stringy. Yeah. I mean, that was why it was invented, wasn't it?
Sure.
So that country artists, I believe, could
get actual accurate 12-string. Because
exactly.
otherwise you're sort of,
So then people like me come along and kind of appropriate it for our own needs. And yeah, I just, one Nashville strumming amongst a couple of normal guitars, suddenly it just sings in a completely different way. A limitation is one of the mothers of invention, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think that's sometimes this software and these plugins, there are so many parameters and so many things you can do. It's just like, oh my God, here you've only got 5 or 6 knobs. So on each channel anyway. So you don't have that many possibilities anyway. And that just tends to focus you more on getting what you need very quickly, I find.
I've noticed that there's this culture of selling presets, and it starts to make sense.
Right.
Because you're sitting there, where somebody would say, oh, these are my 10 favorite sounds. And you're like, okay, thank you. You just saved me hours of trying to get to that place.
Although there's something always about finding your own.
Of course.
I mean, I think that's, one of the things we talked about the 70s, 80s, there was no preset generation until, when did presets sort of start coming in? I mean, the 80s, the idea of the preset came in. Before that, I mean, I always say that about guitar players. You look at guitar players, 60s, 70s, 80s, they're all very distinct. And they've all got a very unique tone. And it comes...
Strived for that.
Well, partly strive, but partly it's just like happy accident, because it was the guitar they had, it was the pedals they could afford, it was the amp they could afford when they were a teenager.
And their interpretation of something.
And that's their sound. Yeah. And then you get into the 80s, the 90s, and suddenly you can buy the Jimmy Page sound, you can buy the Andy Summers sound as a preset or with a particular plugin. And suddenly gradually, I should say, you start to find these very distinctive voices become harder to find because everyone is finding it very easy to copy the sound of their hero. And what was beautiful about before is they were trying to copy the sound of their hero, failing, but coming up with something really unique.
Yeah. Genelecs all around. I see you have the focals, which you say you use, but you did say to me off camera, you do find yourself working a lot in headphones.
The focals are amazing. I love them, and I always check my stereo mixes on them, but I tend to find 90% of the time now, if I'm mixing in stereo I'm using the DAWs. They're so good. I trust what I'm hearing on them. And there used to be a time when I would do a mix on headphones and then I would blow it out onto the speakers and it would be like, oh Christ, I've completely misjudged the low end or the top end. And I've just stopped having to do that. They're not flattering. They're not flattering.
No, not at all.
Some people have a hard time with them because they're used to wearing these really hyped headphones.
Yep.
And they put the Odysseys on and it's like, wow, it suddenly sounds quite flat.
Which model of Odysseys are these?
Those are the 5s, LCD 5s.
LCD 5s.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're using the cord. They just sent me something to try.
That's right. Yeah, so I'm using the headphone amp, the cord headphone amp.
Yeah, are you a big fan?
I am. It sounds great. I mean, again, there wasn't a massive problem with the Odyssey straight out of the Apollo.
Yeah.
But this has just added an extra little bit of clarity. Yeah.
In depth, front to back. What is it?
Hard to articulate.
Yeah.
Yeah, hard to articulate. A little bit of magic. Yeah. Without hyping it. You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah.
You just find mixing, you can just get a bit more detail out of it.
I think so. I can hear the signature of reverbs a bit clearer. I can hear the low end a bit clearer, top end, all the usual stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Amazing. I've got to ask, what is that bass there?
Right. This is my latest toy. This is I don't know which order you say them in. It's a Baldwin Burns or a Burns Baldwin bass guitar. The reason I bought this, because I wanted a particular sound for my last record, The Overview. And it's the sound on Serge Gainsbourg's Melody Nelson album.
Ah, okay.
And it's I don't know how well you remember that album and that sound. It's a very plucked sound. It's got an incredibly kind of pointed attack to it. And I did some research, asked a few friends. I said, what is that sound? How did they get that sound? And they said, oh, it's a Baldwin Burns bass guitar. And I found one online for about 1,500 quid and I bought it and it said, used to belong to Jack Bruce, but every bass on the internet says used to belong to Jack Bruce. Yeah. So I don't necessarily buy into that, but that's the sound. It's this it's got no bottom end on it at all. You have to EQ shitloads of bottom end in to make it sound like a bass. So this is the sound of the bass. As I say, very little low end. But that lovely kind of percussive chord. But I think part of it is because it's got this thing over
whatever that is,
where you would normally play. So it kind of forces you to either play up here or it forces you to play down by the bridge. So it makes it even more kind of percussive. It's sort of pizzicato-y. But it really, the thing is that if you want the bass to really speak in a mix, this has got that. And if I dial in some bottom ends, which I'm doing.
Now it's a bass.
It's a bass.
It's interesting. It speaks like a Rickenbacker without having a Rickenbacker tone.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
It doesn't quite have the growl of a Rickenbacker. It's smoother.
Yeah.
But as I say, it's that sound. If you listen to those old Serge Gainsbourg records, like Melody Nelson or Je T'aime, this is that sound. And those records were all made in the UK. I've forgotten the name of the bass player, it was Dave somebody, but it was all these UK session players. So you're right when you say it's a very kind of British sound. Yeah.
Yeah, I think Shadows, 60s. Yeah. I don't know, but I feel like the Shadows bass player played one. I could be wrong.
It wouldn't surprise me at all. That would be definitely the vintage and the kind of person that would have played one. I think somebody told me they only made about 10 bass. They made guitars primarily. They only made about 10 basses. So I'm quite honoured if that's true. I'm quite honoured to have one, even if
Bison,
even if it didn't really belong to Jack Bruce, Yeah.
It looks amazing,
and it looks amazing too. It's funny. I love guitars that are beat up. I love guitars that are a bit beat up. The paint's all painted.
It looks like if a vintage motorcycle was a bass.
Yeah, that kind of thing. Yeah,
this sort of.
Yeah, but it still plays beautifully. It still sounds amazing. So yeah, that was my big toy purchase last year.
And is this the song you were using it on?
So I've been working on a new song, and yeah, I've been playing. I play bass like a guitar player. Like all guitar players, I play bass like a guitar player. So it's sort of a little bit of drum and bass influence on this track. So it's just. So I'm right up there. Sorry. Do you know what? It's a great example for me of a sound that we were talking about this off camera earlier. Sometimes sounds in isolation are not impressive.
Sure.
But you put them in a track and they've got magic is in the track. So to me, if you, it's not an amazing sound, but
yeah. Sounds great.
It's amazing in the track.
Yeah.
It's just got all the right qualities to make it speak in the track.
I did a video recently with Michael Beinhorn and we were playing back the bass tone from a track. And it was like a bit farty, a bit like basses sometimes are. And all these people are like, oh my God, that's a terrible bass sound.
It's amazing in the mix.
Amazing in the mix.
Yeah. I mixed a Black Sabbath, some old Black Sabbath sessions, and Geezer's tone is like, it's like no one would say that was a great sound.
Yeah.
But then you put it together with Tony's guitar. That's the sound.
Yeah,
that's the Sabbath sound. It's magical.
And Geezer is such an integral part of that band.
Yeah,
one of the,
completely.
I think, a big riff writer on so many of those songs.
Yeah, and he wrote the lyrics too. Yeah, very, very part of the creative core. Yeah, and I'm always constantly amazed by that. So you're kind of isolating things, and you're saying, and then you put it in the mix. It's like that's exactly the way it needs to be to make that track work. And I think that's one of the problems I have with people that are not, when they're mixing a record or they're tracking a record, they're not thinking like a musician, they're thinking like a technician. It's like every sound in isolation has to be luxurious and incredible and dazzling. And then you put it all together and it sounds like shit.
Yeah.
Because not everything can sound dazzling. There's a sort of, gestalt thing that goes on with a mix where sometimes sounds in isolation are a bit sort of, it's a bit unimpressive, a bit flat. But it's the perfect sound for the recipe.
And like you were saying earlier, not every sound has to be featured. Sometimes the sound is there, or like you're talking about with the reverbs.
Yeah.
That is there just to support another sound.
It can't be, yeah. And that's one of the things you learn a lot also. I mean, one of the things I learned from mixing a lot of vintage records is sometimes just keep the reverb in mono. Not everything has to be cinematic widescreen because not everything can be cinematic and widescreen. Sometimes just keeping a reverb, even though it's counterintuitive, you listen to the sound in isolation, it doesn't sound as good now. Put it in the mix, suddenly it's got the space to speak that it doesn't when it's got this big stereo reverb on it. And those are things you can only learn by trial and error. And I think by hearing the music as music, if that makes sense.
Makes perfect sense.
And I always say that's one of the reasons maybe why I think a lot of other musicians like the way I remix their records is because I approach them as a musician rather than as a mixing engineer, if that makes sense, yeah.
That makes absolutely perfect sense. So you have a keyboard hiding under here?
Yeah, little crappy MIDI keyboard, yeah, it does the job. Well,
talking of, when you're making your solo records and stuff and you're getting drummers, you're building the track, you're programming some basic grooves and ideas that you want them to play?
Exactly, yeah.
Do you then send it off, get them to track it and then keep retracking to them? Or do you quite often finish your track and say, put the drums in? Or is it a combination thereof?
All of the above.
Yeah.
All of the above. So here I'm using a drum and bass, which is played by a friend of mine, actually, Russell Holtzman, a friend of mine. He sent me some basic drum and bass grooves. And I thought, wouldn't it be interesting
to... the ambience on that kick.
Yeah, well, so that's, yeah.
Feels like the floor is resonating with it.
Now, here's an example. This is through that plugin I was talking about earlier. And again, I'm not endorsed by these guys, but it's like a $20 plugin. This is my favorite plugin. So this I'm putting through the Sketch cassette plugin with the compressor on. So here's an example. Take the compressor off.
Oh, yeah.
So it's compressing, but it's also brightening it up as well. Without it completely. It's a little bit more hi-fi and a bit more crisp and digital.
Well, it really helps that ring on the snare cut as well, yeah.
It helps the ring. It takes that kind of digital top end off it. It makes it sound, I mean, that cliche makes it sound more analog to me, without really knowing what I mean by that. But what I imagine analog to sound like, that kind of roll off of the top end. And the beautiful thing about this plugin is you can age the tape, you can add saturation, you can add dropouts, flutter, wow, all the things that we spent years hating. I love that. You know, I mean, one of the things, you know, I also grew up listening to lo-fi, stuff like Throbbing Gristle and Cabaret Voltaire, you know, and I fell in love with that kind of lo-fi aesthetic too, you know. Things that sound hi-fi sometimes can be a bit bland, you know. So put back the sort of grunge and the impurities.
Cabaret Voltaire, I haven't heard that mentioned in a bit.
Yeah, I love the Cabs, yeah. They just reformed, actually.
They did?
They did some shows recently, yeah. But everyone reforms eventually, don't they? Except ABBA. Anyway, but... and Led Zeppelin. No, even they reformed, didn't they? So there's a great example.
Well, ABBA kind of reformed.
They kind of did.
Holographically.
Yeah, they did, yeah. So,
have you been?
It was amazing.
Yeah, I went. It was amazing. It's so much fun.
I love ABBA so much.
Yeah, me too.
But we were talking earlier about how I always put the Sketch plugin on a piano. So here's a piano. So that's my upright.
Yeah.
It's got a low pass on it. But if I put the Aberrant plugin on it, compressor, go to a cheap brand of tape, make it a bit more old, age the tape a bit more, add some saturation. It's the best plugin I know for just getting character out of a sound almost instantly. And it's like $20 plugin. It's like a no-brainer for me. Everyone should have this plugin. But actually, I hope they don't, because that's my signature.
Well, a lot of people will now.
They will now, yeah. It's brilliant.
Well, I love the immediacy. You were talking about having tools that you can just go, oh, boom, this sounds better. Oh, that sounds better. Oh,
yeah. There's not too many options on it. I mean, you basically got, you know, you've got about 15 or 16 different knobs or things you can play with, and that's it. It's not too much. You can even get tape flanging out of it, old school tape flanging. There you go. You know.
That's really good.
Yeah.
Flanger plugins are really hard to find that sound good.
Real old school. Well, my favorite other. Funny enough, I mixed an album for XTC where they were. I don't know if you're familiar with their Dukes of Stratosphere.
Of course.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm a huge John Leckie fan.
I figured you would be. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's some real old school tape phasing on it, and I remixed the album, and I had to figure out how to do the tape, and I basically went and tried every single phaser or flanging plugin on the market, and I decided the best one in terms of getting that sound is the I don't know how you say it, Hugh Hughes.
I think it's Hugh Hughes. That's what I always say.
The satin one. You can do your own sort of moves, your own flanging. So you can do all sorts of. Well, that's more like an ADT thing there, but there's So I experimented with a lot of different plugins. I forget which one it was I used now, which setting I used, but I found like a real old vintage phaser sound in here somewhere, and this was the one I figured found that was the closest to those old 60s, you know, tape phase processes. You know, and there's a great example of an album that was recorded really quickly.
Yeah.
And they didn't think too much about what they were doing, but they just had a kind of institutional knowledge of all those old techniques. Like John Leckie had kind of grown up making records in Abbey Road and knew about all the tape phaser stuff. And Dave Gregory similarly was a, you know, kind of student of all that stuff. So they're just having fun using all those old techniques. But of course, I'm remixing the record 40 years later, and I have to recreate all this.
You remixed it in Immersive?
Yeah.
I've not heard that.
It's amazing. So I basically went, as I say, I went and basically I demoed all of the plugins.
Did you get to talk to the band and John about it?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. And not John, but Andy and Dave were all involved.
Who basically commissioned it? Was it the band or the label?
So it's the band and the label. That the guy that runs the label, a guy called Declan Colgan, who was at Virgin for years. He's now retired actually, but he basically runs XTC's label and King Crimson's label. That's
nice
because King Crimson, Robert owns the whole catalogue now.
Incredible.
So they have a label called DGM, Discipline Global Mobile, and the XTC label is called Ape House, and they're both basically run by Declan. So we've been gradually going through and redoing a lot of the mixes I did in 5.1 into Atmos. We've done skylarking, Big Express drums and wires are just about to come out. I'm pretty sure we'll end up doing this in Atmos too. It's going to sound so good.
It's interesting that they wouldn't have referenced Hatfield and North or Caravan, but it just sounds so obviously that.
I might be wrong about that. They might do, but I'm knowing Andy as I do. Andy's is more like late 60s psychedelic singles. Dave Gregory probably would be more familiar with the Canterbury stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm a huge fan of that.
Yeah, me too.
National Health, you know.
Yeah.
Dave Stewart, the other Dave Stewart.
I did one Caravan. I did In the Land of Grey and Pink.
I love that record.
Yeah, me too. Years and
Golf
years.
Girls Stop to Think.
Yeah, I did that years ago in 5.1. Yeah. That's the only Canterbury record I think I've done. Yeah, I love that sound.
Yeah, it's such a great period. It's great to go back and realise that all those records were like top 40 albums. People actually bought them.
It's nuts, isn't it? And and I think they still sell as well. I mean, they don't sell massively, but I think that music is rediscovered year after year after year. You know, the records still sell and still sound, in some ways, sound better than they ever did because they've gone through that era of sounding old-fashioned and they've come out the other end. They just sound great now.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? I think all music goes through that cycle, doesn't it? It's like 80s music now sounds fantastic. Whereas if you'd asked people to listen to 80s music like even 10, 15 years ago, something about it would have sounded very dated. Now, I mean, listen to No Jacket Required now. It's none more 80s.
Yeah.
But to me, that's what makes it sound fantastic.
Yeah.
Fantastic. That whole kind of 80s aesthetic. If you listen to some of the, the modern pop, you can hear the influence of that generation of 80s music now. It's cool again.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah.
Good, because it was so individual.
Yeah.
So unique. And especially the British records of that period, because they were, Hugh was creating ambience in a room.
Yeah, Tears for Fears. I've done all the Tears for Fears records. Those records sound so good. And the band came back a couple of years ago and they're kind of, I wouldn't say as big as they were, but they're certainly a lot bigger than they were like 10, 15 years ago, because I think people just understand now the craft, the creativity, and just how good the songs too.
Are amazing.
The songs allied to the innovative use of the technology around at the time. And it's funny because one of the other things I notice about a lot of that music now is you understand the lineage from progressive rock through to albums like Seeds of Love and Songs from the Big Chair, which I think at the time nobody would have admitted it. But there's something about the ambition and the scale and the pretentiousness, and I mean pretentiousness in the best possible sense of the word, because I love pretentious music. I wish there was more pretension in modern pop music.
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, of course.
The pretentiousness of it and that aspect of reaching for the stars and not being afraid to fall flat on your face. And we end up with tracks like Shout and Sowing the Seeds of Love, just Bad Man's Song, Women in Chains, masterpieces. Yeah. But to me, there's something about it that's a very strong progressive rock aesthetic. Not in the sense it sounds
look
like...
at Trevor, 1 minute he's singing Yes.
Well, that's true,
and he's also doing, Frankie Goes to Hollywood.
Well, I've just remixed Pleasure Dome. That's coming out in the next couple of months.
Amazing.
In Atmos. Complete. I mean, Lipson, as you know, because you've spoken to, massive prog rock fan.
Yeah.
And so much of what they loved about progressive rock, they were channeling in to make these modern pop records. And now I think we can hear it in a way that perhaps we couldn't, or we weren't necessarily so conscious of it at the time. But now it's so obvious. Even to the point where he's got Steve Howe playing a guitar on, Pleasure Dome.
I know, isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
And I think that was a DI as well. I think it's like a 175 DI. I can't remember what he told me, but I feel like that's what.
No, I think I've had the conversation. He told me that he came in, literally did it in like 5 minutes. DI, played it once, perfect. Yeah.
The other thing, and we're talking about the difference probably in the British aesthetic, is I think even despite progressive rock at its most insane, the song was always at the core. There was always a great song in there.
Yeah, and I think that's something that, if you go back and you listen to Close to the Edge, for example, which for me is kind of the archetype of progressive rock, that album. It's like, to me, they're the archetypal progressive rock band, incredible musicians, but all working together in a kind of symbiotic way with, as you say, great songs at the core of it. The main song section of Close to the Edge is a brilliant song. And also the way that side-long track, the 18-minute long track is structured, it's structured in the same way that a great pop song would be structured. There are themes that come back. There are earworms that come back. There is equivalent of middle eight. Now, the equivalent of middle eight might be a 5-minute long, muso extemporization, but it still serves the purpose that a middle eight would serve in a pop song. And I think a lot of what disappoints me about a lot of modern pop, progressive rock, and there's a lot of people making modern progressive rock, is it's just a lot of bits strung together. And I'm as guilty of this as anyone.
Sure.
Essentially, my overview album is a bunch of bits strung together. But I think what's beautiful about, really beautifully structured progressive rock is it still has that sensibility that comes from writing 3-minute pop. It's funny because in some ways, if you ask someone to come up with a list of the 10 most iconic progressive rock artists, I'd say majority of them would be British. It's a very British art form. And of course, there have been American exponents. There are modern exponents, bands like Tool, Dream Theater, kind of a lot of progressive DNA. But the archetype of progressive rock is a very British thing. The only exceptions for me would be Rush, who are a Canadian band, and Zappa, who is American. But the other 8 on the top 10 list would always be Genesis, Yes, Pink Floyd, Camel, ELP, Gentle Giant, King Crimson. These are the kind of, and in some ways, progressive rock was the equivalent to what is a quintessentially American art form, jazz. Because it has something about it is very similar, that sense of not being bound by the pop form, that idea that musicianship is quite highly valued. But in some ways, it also couldn't be more different, because jazz is all about the spirit of the moment and improvisation, and progressive rock is very cerebral and very structured, sometimes too much, you might say. But to me, it's a quintessentially English art form. We were talking about Hatfield in the North and Caravan, that whole Canterbury sound could not be more not be more English.
With the Sinclairs, like in the land of grey and pink. I mean, singing with the most archetypal English accent ever.
Well, that comes from Robert Wyatt. They said Robert Wyatt started off, just singing about whatever he was looking at in the studio. Something about it is so unpretentious in a way, and so charming. Yeah.
Because we keep talking about being off camera. I just went and used your bathroom, everybody. Isn't that exciting stuff? And I just went in and I was like, oh, this feels like home. There is a Kate Bush photo up there.
Yes.
I don't know if we ever touched on, maybe when we met at Bob and Betty's dinner. Hounds of Love to me, I think she's amazing in everything, but Hounds of Love to me is like...
It's amazing. The Dreaming is the one for
Dreaming, yeah.
But Hounds of Love, not far behind. Just an incredible catalogue. And, what's extraordinarily experimental but still accessible records she made.
Hounds of Love is like 5 top 10 singles or something. It's
crazy.
Like
and it's as far out as anything in the world of progressive rock. The Dreaming is even more bizarre. The Dreaming, the way she uses her voice on that record, it was just scary. Sometimes it's just scary, literally scary. It makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. As someone in the mainstream making pop music, and I suppose someone like Billie Eilish would be an equivalent to that now, wouldn't they?
Yeah. But Kate, I've interviewed people around the making who, lots of people in and around making records with her. And even right from the get-go, they said in 1978 when she first walked into the studio, even though she wasn't credited as the producer, everybody said
knew what she wanted.
She knew what she wanted.
Yeah, she was 19 years old or something, right? I've never met anyone, no matter what kind of music they like, what kind of background they come from, that doesn't think Kate Bush is amazing.
Yeah, I agree.
She's just goddess, basically, isn't she?
Absolutely incredible. Yeah. So it was just great. I was like, all these black and white photos, I was like, every artist up there. And a Neil Young as well. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Who else have I got now? I've got Nick Drake in there.
Yeah.
Kate.
Sid Barrett.
Sid Barrett. Yeah. Karl-Heinz Stockhausen is in there.
Yeah.
The Avengers, Patrick Renee and Diana Rigg. Yeah. Lots of reference points from my childhood. Yeah.
Yeah. All amazing.
Yeah.
But you're a little bit like me in this respect, that you also we're of our time. We love that kind of proggy crossover, when Genesis were making Duke and the Genesis album that Hugh did with Mamas and all that stuff. All of that with the Police and the post-punk and all this stuff. But we also listened to the bands before who weren't actually in our age group. Because as much as I love the Yes album, we would have been 4 when that came out, I think, 3, something like that. So that kind of like...
Yeah, I don't know about if it was the same with you, but I had a friend who had a big brother. Everyone had a friend who had a big brother who had all those records.
Yeah.
At least I did anyway. So he had Camel records, he had Hawkwind records, he had Yes records. He had a lot of records that, as you say, weren't really part of the zeitgeist. And I think people forget in the age of the internet, because everything is so in the whole of the history of music is instantly available to you. It wasn't the case then.
No.
It wasn't the case. I remember reading about Frank Zappa, but my local W.H. Smith's or Old Town Records in Hell Hempstead had none of his records. So it became like a mission to hear this music. No one was playing it on the radio. The records weren't in the record stores. How was I going to hear this music? Now, there was one caveat to that, is that the local library in Hell Hempstead had one Frank Zappa record.
Which one?
200 Motels, which is unlistenable. To me, it's the one Frank Zappa album I've never got to grips with. And I like avant-garde experimental music, but it wasn't. But eventually, you know, I tracked down an expensive import copy of Hot Rats or something, you know.
Yeah.
And my point is this, that sometimes you had to invest a lot, time, money and effort to discover music. And this comes back to my earlier point of these days, something that confronts expectations. These days, you wouldn't, I say you, I'm speaking very generally here. The listener is probably less likely to give it a second chance because they've invested nothing in it. They haven't paid for it.
It's a very good point.
They haven't had to hunt it down.
Yep.
I bought records when I was a kid. I hated the first time I heard them, but I'd spent loads of money on them. So I listened to them 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 times. And sometimes those records would become the records that were my favorites and change my idea about music. And something like Captain Beefheart's Troutmaster Replica, I mean, it made no sense the first time I heard it.
Same here.
I thought it was awful.
Yeah.
But after 10 times, I realized it was a work of genius.
Yeah. Yeah.
And my point is this, how many people are going to go on that journey, forcing themselves to listen to something that doesn't immediately connect in an era when everything is available and everything is free?
I bought Out of the Blue.
Love that record.
Yeah, masterpiece. And I remember listening to the double album, listening to side 1 for 2 weeks until I flipped it over.
Right.
To get to side 2.
Yeah.
And then I listened to side 2 Obsession.
Yeah.
And then I couldn't go on to the other record yet. And I went back to side 1 and was like, oh my God, I forgot how good this is.
All right.
It was just like, it was such a wonderful song. But you're right. It's that difficulty, I suppose, in getting it. I remember buying Shake Your Booty without ever hearing it because I went to the Record and Tape Exchange in Notting Hill and they had like a marked down copy. And I was like, it's Frank Zappa, Shake Your Booty. I was looking at all the musicians on it. So I bought it.
That'll do me. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean.
And was it what you expected?
No, because it was much better, but it wasn't what I expected.
Because that's another album, which, I mean, the thing is, there isn't really a typical Frank Zappa album, is there? So you kind of almost, it depends on what you kind of happened across. Now, the first one I happened across 200 Motels I didn't like, but then the next one I got was Hot Rats, which I loved. And then Shake Your Booty again for me, it's very different again. It's very smutty. Yeah, it's very comedy-based record.
Bobby Brown,
Took me a while to get used to it. Jewish Princess, all that stuff. But the point is this, is you gave it time to, you gave yourself time to digest.
Yeah.
And I think the problem with the proliferation, and not just in the world, this doesn't just apply to music, of course, it applies to everything. The amount of shows, TV shows, people say to me, oh, have you seen this on Netflix? Or have you seen this on Disney? Or have you seen this on Apple? So every day it seems like somebody says to me, oh, this new show, you got to check it out. And I make a mental note, yeah, I'll watch that. And then I've forgotten. Because there's so much content out there now, films, TV, music. And the problem is that there isn't enough hours in the day to experience it all. So I think, my belief is there was actually a sweet spot around the late 70s, this era you're talking about. Yeah. I think there was
very much of the same opinion.
There was a sweet spot. There was just enough music coming out.
Yep.
Not too much, not too little. There was always something new coming out, but not so much that things could pass you by.
Yeah.
That you had time to check
out. There wasn't a dominant scene.
It wasn't a dominant scene.
There was two-tone at the same time as post-punk, at the same as punk, at the same as new wave, new romantics, new wave of British metal.
Reggae. Yeah. And there was interesting things coming out. And the point is you had the time to check it all out.
Yeah.
And then Live Aid kind of, for me, is the watershed moment when that starts to change. I'm not blaming Live Aid.
No. I understand.
But I think that's a very good sort of watermark point, watershed moment. Live Aid, pre and post Live Aid for me, the music changes for the worse.
Makes perfect sense because it's kind of that peak of everything that we love, and then there's a fall off. It's a little bit like CDs. There was a point, I'm probably going to get the year wrong, but I think it was either 2004 or 2005, which was the biggest year of CD sales ever.
Okay.
And it was like this, and then the drop off the next year with
streaming
MP3s. And,
yeah.
you know, all the digital downloads was just like absolutely massive.
Yeah.
But you're right. I think everything built to this because Live Aid is incredible that we got all these great artists. But you're right. It's sort of like this tidal wave, isn't it?
But CD also had a part to play in that because CD also is reaching a sort of critical mass around 85, 86.
Right.
And CDs start to bloat the length of records.
Sure.
You see records go from being 40 minutes
or less
to 60, 70, 80 minutes.
Yeah.
And it so you reach a point early 90s where it's becoming quantity over quality. So I think...
And in America, the problem they had was, being there in 95 when I first went there, the problem they had is like they wouldn't release singles. So they forced the consumer to buy an album.
Right.
And if they could sell it for 14, 15, 16.99, you just wanted your one kind of, you know, all that glitters is gold.
Yeah.
You went out and bought that album for one song. And talk about creating resentment.
But that's interesting now, isn't it? Because now in the age of streaming, people can just get that one song. Yeah. They add it to their playlist. Even 20 years ago, people were still buying albums, as you pointed out. Right through the history of pop music, people have had to buy albums to get the one song they wanted, sometimes, if it wasn't a single, you know.
Yeah.
And now they don't have to do that anymore. So the point is that...
Well, they had singles in America, but they wouldn't physically print it.
Right, I see.
You were forced to buy the album.
So it was on the radio as a single, you had to buy the album, yeah. And then you buy the CD, which was completely brick-walled as well. Mastering was brick-walled, so your ears would bleed after 2 songs.
And producers I know of that period, they'll admit it. They spent all their time on the 2 songs that were going to be the single, and the rest of it was like almost like, whatever you want to do, boys.
Right.
And the band would just kind of do some generic ska pop, and have 2 hit songs.
That's why I've always felt like I'm kind of old-fashioned, is because I don't think I would ever fall out of love with the idea of the album.
Well, your first love was Dark Side of the Moon, which is an album.
And so is Love to Love You Baby by Donna Summer. The first side is a 16-minute long journey. It's a disco symphony, as I like to call it. And I think I fell in love with that idea of being able to take the listener on a journey, and I still love that idea, and it's still fundamental to everything I do. Take the listener on a journey. And like you say, bring in different genres, surprise them, don't necessarily do the predictable thing. And that, in the age of streaming and the age of the 2-minute instant grat track, makes me unfashionable. And I'm very happy to be unfashionable.
Oh, a great way to end up.
And on that bombshell.
On that bombshell.
Yeah.
Thank you ever so much. That's
Pleasure,
awesome. All relevant links. Oh, by the way, Stephen doesn't know what to call his studio. So answers on a postcard, please, for any Blue Peter and Tony Hart fans over there. Or you can just write down below, what should he call his studio?
I've never had a name for this studio. 6 years I've been here. I've never had a name for it.
So if you're looking at the comments and you see people saying you should call your studio, it's because they got to the end of the video, and you are too. So we'll see how many of you actually make it to the end.
Yeah.
Thanks ever so much.
Cheers, buddy.
Thank you.